So I finally did it today. I hit Mythic, and I'm very, very happy about it. It's something that I kind of had as a goal for this season, and with a lot of the cards coming in from M20, I was really geared up to go ahead and give it a shot. I did it with a Temur Elementals deck that's sort of from all the way down from gold through platinum, diamond, etc. up to Mythic. Really had a nice trail of evolution and changes to it. It went from more of an aggro build to more of a mid-range to finally a little bit more on the control end of the spectrum. So I'm going to give you the list, and you guys can sort of take a look at it. And this is the list, the Mythic Reef list that took me to Mythic today. So there's no doubt that Temur Elementals is a pretty good deck, and there's different ways to play it. You can play it on the aggro end of the spectrum. You can play it on the more control end of the spectrum, and everywhere in between. Either way, it revolves around Risen Reef and some elemental ramp, etc. Nonetheless, this is what we did, and this is how we played it. I'll give you the list, and I'll tell you a little bit about the strategy behind it, but a lot of it is fairly straightforward. All right, so I have 4 times Llanowar Elf, 3 times Shock. I have 4 Leafkin Druids, 2 Paradise Druids, 4 Hydroid Krasis, 1 Entrancing Melody, 4 Risen Reefs. I have 1 Pulse of Marasa, and the reason I have this is because I was watching a player use this in a Temur Elementals deck in Alias V's tournament over the past weekend, and it actually came into play, and the extra 6 life gain is not so bad either. But this is a card that I threw in here purely off of the inspiration of that, and it made the cut up until we got to here. So I have 4 Omnath, Locus of the Royal, a single Mass Manipulation. I have only 2 Cavalier of the Thorns, and this is purely based on the fact that it's just a matter of I don't have any more of them and no more Mythic cards. As you can see up here, no more Mythic wild cards to craft more, but I've got 2 of these, 4 Nissa, who shakes the world, and 2 Chandras, Awakened Inferno in the main board. You got your standard package here. Before we get to the sideboard, we're going to talk a little bit about what this deck does. Now, obviously, there's tons of ramp. 4 Llanowar Elves, Leafkin, and Paradise Druid allows you to go ahead and possibly cheat out your Risen Reef or your Omnath as early as possible, but your main goal is hopefully you can even get out Nissa on turn 3 and then really go buck wild. Now, the 3 shocks are purely to either address early game threats to you, especially in Feather, the 10th District Legionnaire, or cards like other Llanowar Elves, Risen Reef, etc. This shock is good to just sort of buzz those off the board and maintain a little bit of board neutrality while you're building your ramp. The single Entrancing Melody is because there's a lot of cards out there that are easy to steal. Entrancing Melody for X0 steals an opponent's land that is brought out as Nissa. It also takes a Hydroid Krasis for CMC of 2. The Entrancing Melody is pretty solid for an early game steal if your opponent is putting a lot of pressure on the board. Not to mention a beefed up Steamkin for 2 or anything along those lines. Entrancing Melody will help. Only a single one though. And Mass Manipulation in this case is for late game, a big swing late game. If your opponent's playing a lot of big Planeswalkers, eventually they might run out of cards. You can steal Liliana, steal Teferi, steal an opponent's Nissa even, in ensuring that you yourself can go ahead and take the swing back of tempo and really limit your opponent's access to those big threats, those big Planeswalkers, those big creatures. Cavalier of Thorns is a 5/6 elemental with reach. You could get this out fairly early. It also allows you to go ahead and ramp up with land, given its deploy effect. And when it dies, you can fix your draw out of your graveyard. So it really has multiple layers of effectiveness in this deck. The other thing I want to get at is Chandra, Awakened Inferno. I used to have this as a sideboard deck, but as I progressed through Diamond, I noticed that there was a little bit less of a aggro presence and more of a mid-range to late game presence that really benefit from having Chandra in the main board to either drop down and go -X to remove a big threat, or to drop down an uptick and then go ahead and progress to a more grindy win based on the fact that you're going to be playing a lot of turns. If that's the case, Chandra is going to help you out because she can't be countered, and she immediately upsticks to 8 and puts your opponent on a little bit of a clock. So that's the board this is the main deck that I wanted to roll with. Pulse of Morass is going to get you back whatever's important, be it a Risen Reef, a Cavalier of Thorns, an Omnath, whatever it is. But this is the board that this is the main deck that I used to really at least be competitive in first games and stick it to your opponent, where you don't necessarily have to always rely on your sideboard tech to win. Nonetheless, let's go to the sideboard either way, and here we'll do it this way. The sideboard is 2 Veils of Summer. Now, this is a really good card to protect your own cards from being counterspelled. Again, this gives everything essentially hexproof. The spells, it says spells you control can't be countered this turn. So you can actually play this as a response. You play it after an opponent negates or Dovin's Veto. This even topples Dovin's Veto. You're not countering Dovin's Veto. You're just making everything else that you've cast hexproof, meaning that it can no longer target your spells. Veil of Summer is a nice counterspell for the counterspell. It's really, really effective. 2 Aether Gusts to get rid of red or green permanents. Be it Nissa, that might be an issue, who's going to be upticking too much, who's on the verge of ulting. Other red threats or green threats, there's so many of them. Green is a really, really popular color right now. It's a powerful color too. 2 negates just in there. I used to play with 4, but I think that was a little bit overkill. Negate really comes in clutch in very key moments. You don't need to play the counter game against your opponent because you'll never win against an opponent who plays like Esper or something along those lines that plays a lot of counter spells. You just need to really come in clutch with the 1 or 2 negates that you are playing in order to stop that major tempo swing and keep board presence. For instance, if you're playing and you go down there and you play your Nissa on turn 5, you bust out a Breeding Pool and you attack, and your opponent might not have much to match you, but their next turn might be their Teferi turn. You negate it, and suddenly you have the board, the whole new turn to do things, and the Teferi is no longer an issue. Fry, good against Feather, good against Esper and things like that. Fry has been really, really helpful. 4 Lava Coils because you need to get stuff off the board, and 4 damage to an Exile endgame is pretty solid. 2 Thrashing Brontos. It's also a 3/4 body for 3 that you could play on turn 2, which is really, really good against a lot of different decks, especially early Vampire decks that might be problematic. It also can sack to kill Wilderness Reclamation. If you have the odd artifact floating around, this can help in that regard as well. And finally, the Shifting Ceratops. This has been an exceptional card against mono blue, because if you find it, play it on curve, your opponent is essentially toast. Mono blue can't do anything to this save for a board wipe, a River's Rebuke or something, but in the meantime you bust this down and you keep swinging in for 5, and in 4 turns you win. There's not much they can do. This is a great card. It can tap land for reach if necessary, but you want to be aggressive with this. Nonetheless, it's a 5/4 body for 4 that does some pretty spectacular things. This is the deck, ladies and gentlemen. Again, your standard procedure here. It's tough to talk strategy because Magic is so diverse and different, and there's always going to be so many different competing strategies that play off of both turns, so it's hard to say follow this linear path and you'll get there. You need to play reactive, but in the most cases what you want to be doing is playing your Lanoir into a Risen Reef if that's your second turn, if the mana lines up. Otherwise you want to play your Lanoir, drop some more land into either Paradise Druid or Leafkin, and then on turn 3 you're playing Nissa, and then you're really getting extra mileage off of all that mana that you've got because of Nissa's ambient ability of adding an additional forest to force you tap. You will have some issues, I feel, with Gruul decks that get really on pace early. Feather can be problematic as well. Typically, the thing about Feather decks is they're very draw dependent, and you can go wide on a board. They might have 1 or 2 or 3 threats on the board, but if you can establish a game where you're going wider than your opponent, you can possibly bust them down and chump block here or there in order to just maintain a life total. Your Hydroid Craces are going to be good for boosting up your land total once you get a myriad of lands on the board. Pulse of Marasa for 6 life if necessary, bringing things back. You should be okay with this. Like I said, this deck got me to Mythic. We played against a really nice array of decks, and yeah, that's it. This is the deck, and this is how it rolls. It's standard Temur Elementals. This is the list I used. I mainboard Chandra. She's great. And this is the list. So hopefully you guys dig it. Again, we'll go through it. 3 Shocks, 4 Llanowar Elves, 4 Leafkin Druids, 2 Paradise Druids, 1 Pulse of Marasa, 4 Reefs, 4 Omnath, 2 Cavalier of Thorns, 4 Nissa, 2 Chandra, 1 Entrancing Melody, 4 Hydroids, and 1 Mass Manipulation. My land package is nothing all that special. Let's go to the sideboard here. The sideboard is 2 Veils of Summer, 2 Aether Gust, 2 Negate, 2 Fry, 4 Lava Coils, 2 Brontodons, and a Shifting Ceratops. This is all easily changed and shifted around for whatever meta you're facing at your end of the bargain, wherever you are on the ladder. But good luck with it. This is Mythic Reef, I guess we'll call it. So again, it all comes down to actually evaluating the meta and finding out how, what your sideboard is going to be good at with, and tailoring it that way. And yeah, I mean, skill obviously comes into fact, deck building, etc. But meta analysis is a big part of being successful on the ladder. This is the list that I used to go to get to Mythic. It went from more of an aggro base as I progressed. From Gold and Platinum, it was more of an aggro build. Through Platinum and Diamond, it was a little bit more mid-range, and the final push through Diamond was a lean towards this list right here. So good luck with it. Hopefully it works out for you. Please tell me what you think of it. Constructive criticism, always good. Let me know what card choices you would put in the sideboard and where you're at in the meta as well. As always, please, your subscriptions to the channel are always amazing, and you can catch me on Twitch, twitch.tv/watchflake from Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and sometimes in the evening. You can catch me on Twitter as well, at watchflake, and you'll find out all the interesting musings and nonsense and giveaways and stuff. So thank you again so much for watching, and yeah, be kind to one another. I'll talk to you very soon. Adios.